Can you now see my slides?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so as I said, thanks again for inviting me to speak. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you about this topic remotely. Having seen that sort of introduction to the seminar course, I'm particularly intrigued to see what my cloud of words turns out to be after at the end of the talk. Also, I guess apologies in advance if my outline doesn't actually follow the outline you just saw. That was my first time seeing it, but I think all of the topics covered in it uh, will be covered. So it just won't be quite as neatly laid out. So my my group works in different topics in collective behavior. So we look at we study natural systems to again to sort of get inspiration certainly, but like to get an understanding of what principles nature uses that we can then adapt, and then we engineer systems uh, explicitly inspired by the biology, but not in some sense limited to mimicking the biology. And the feature that all of this has in common, of course, is the collective part of it, right? It's that you have groups of many independent agents that together are doing something interesting beyond the capability of what the individuals can do. So there are two different kinds of questions that we ask, as I say, and I can't seem to advance this slide, so give me a second. Okay. Uh, so in studies of natural systems, the questions that we ask tend to have a scientific flavor. So for instance, let's suppose you've got a group of mound-building termites, uh, and you look at the thing that they do together, in this case, building a mound. So sort of the forward question of emergence is how is it that the individuals and the rules that they're following, the behaviors of the individual agents, how do those lead to these collective outcomes? And then for an engineered system, we ask an engineering kind of question. There's a particular outcome that we want to ensure. You know, let's suppose again on the theme of building that there's some specific building we want to construct, and we want to come up with a set of rules for the individual agents to follow that will lead to that outcome and not to something else. So, and of course, the things that make all of these different topics, I think, challenging but also really interesting are the usual things I think you've been covering in the seminar course, right? Everything is unreliable, is limited, is unpredictable. And in general, we don't have principled ways of connecting these individual and global levels of description of the system. We're looking for ways to connect those and if general principles exist, great, but right now we try to do things really on a case-by-case basis in order to make some progress. These days, everybody is very much focused on AI in the modern machine learning sense. So I'm going to sort of, wave my hand in that general direction and say, obviously, there's kind of a direct mapping of what I'm showing here onto neural systems. So on the natural side, individual agents are individual neurons, and the collective outcomes are things like cognitive phenomena. And then engineering-wise, you've got some particular thing that you want a robot or an agent or an artificial intelligence to do. And the recently very successful way of doing that is you have some learning rules that let you train a network of units to produce some approximation of that behavior. The thing that I would point to as being I guess a meaningful distinction between these systems and the kinds of systems that I want to focus on in the rest of this talk is what you might call, and in fact, the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society called the difference between liquid brains and solid brains. So a solid brain is, for example, a brain, right? Like something where uh, the important thing, I guess, is about the persistence of the connections. So in a solid brain, if you've got one neuron affecting another neuron, the strength of that influence may change, but in general, uh, you can expect that in the future that same unit is going to influence that same unit. You have some ability to sort of rely on the connections being persistent. Whereas in a liquid brain, something like an ant colony, um, if one ant interacts with another one, you have no guarantee those two are ever going to meet again, right? And so uh, there is, in a sense, that much more flexibility, but there's also sort of like, I guess, less to rely on, less that's fewer regularities, fewer things that are consistent. And so you can ask, if you have one of these liquid brains, how is it that such a brain can learn? How can it store information if, again, if there are no persistent connections between units? So there's a few different places where that information can be stored. Uh, I think kind of the most obvious one is that the individual units, the single robots or the single ants or whatever, they can individually learn. You can have information stored in the interactions between agents. So depending on how uh, uh, so I suppose like an example might be if you're talking about things like formation control, you might have talked about in a previous lecture, the way that relationships get set up, even if it's not sort of long-term persistent, you can store information in that if it's at least if I guess relationships hold at least short term. The one I want to focus on is this third one. This is, I think, sort of the classic one for social insects. So it's not storing information in the agents at all. It's taking advantage of the thing in the environment that is actually persistent, since the locations and the relative positions of the agents are not persistent. But the world tends to stay where it is, right? And so uh, if you can put information into the environment, it's available, hopefully later in the place where it's relevant. Uh, so for social insects, that sort of broad idea is usually called stigmergy. I think the most famous example is ants with their foraging trails. They're leaving these pheromone trails in the environment, and it's basically it's physically embodied. This chemical in the environment is telling ants that come to that place that there's food at the end of this trail, that there's something worth following, and that information is stuck to the ground. Another, I think, particularly compelling example of stigmergy is the mound-building termites of you get these in Africa and Australia, to a smaller scale in Asia. And here you've got colonies of millions of these individually limited, um, again, like I, I used to say simple until I got a chance to study termites. I will never say simple again describing termites, but these, millions of limited agents, which literally blindly will build these huge, complicated structures. Uh, so the conventional wisdom for the last 60 or 70 years has been that the way they coordinate their behavior is through the use of what's called a cement pheromone. So, I mean, the idea is one termite will come and put down a blob of mud someplace that it has put some pheromone into, and then another termite comes along and encounters that first blob of mud and responds to the pheromone by putting down its own blob in the same place. And so you get positive feedback loop. There's this accumulation of material and this accumulation of pheromone, and through that, something, 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 and then eventually you get the termite mound. And so it's that step in the middle that has really not been, I think, very clear. So we went to try to fill in those intermediate details to try to better understand how is it that, if all of the termites are following this rule about cement pheromone, how does this lead to the structures? We traveled to Namibia, we did a bunch of studies, and kind of long story short, it turns out that this is not a completely settled matter, but probably in all likelihood, there's no such thing as a cement pheromone. So that was a bit of a surprise. So this is kind of the first example of what's going to be a theme here about like a pitfall of bioinspiration is the thing that you think the biological system is doing may not actually be what it's doing. So what we had to do ourselves in this case was basically look for other ways. So obviously they are coordinating their behavior in the sense that they are building these complicated things. What are they doing? What cues are they looking at in terms of coordinating their actions? And so we wound up finding a number of other things, again, based on storing information in the state of the environment. So for instance, the shape of what they stand on is something that is apparently important to them, and when they decide what to do in terms of building. And of course, as they build, they're changing the shape of what they stand on. So there's that feedback very immediately through the environment. Another thing they look at is sharp changes in humidity. Particularly, this is something that looks like it affects kind of how they expand the mound. There's a sharp transition between very humid air inside the mound and very dry air outside it. And depending on the time of day, sort of the location of that boundary changes. And I guess, I don't have time to go into a lot of detail about this, but it looks like that is kind of the driving thing that, for example, leads to their expanding the mound at night, but closing it off during the day. Another thing that they pay a lot of attention to is what others are doing, which I think, in retrospect was not surprising. Termites are really, they're closely related to cockroaches. They're really sort of a social form of cockroach. And of course, there are studies that you might have discussed in previous lectures where people can get cockroaches to behave in certain ways, to modify their behavior, essentially by through them watching what each other are doing, right? Like a cockroach will let the behavior of other cockroaches influence its own behavior. And so it's not surprising that that would be the case in these social cockroaches. In particular here, the thing that that showed up is that they pay a lot of attention to where and when others are digging. So if a termite comes across a site where others are active, the more other termites who are there digging, the more likely it is that this termite is going to stop and join in. And this study in particular really forced us to think differently about what I'm going to anthropomorphize as sort of the termites' idea of what they were doing. So we have always been very focused on deposition, right? Like the thing that brought us to study these animals is the construction, right? The building things up. So we're interested in when they put material down. And everybody who has studied the system, particularly from the theoretical standpoint, is really kind of focused on where they put stuff down. It looks like the termites themselves may really be much more focused on where they pick stuff up, and they may not care at all about where they put it down. It may be that the entire mound is really just a byproduct from the termites' point of view of, they're trying to dig, and when you scoop up a bucket full of soil, you need some place to put it. And so you put it somewhere else other than where you're digging. And that becomes the mound. That actually may be a sufficient explanation for the whole thing. It's surely a richer picture than that, but it's an example of like going and really looking at the system forces you to think about it differently, and potentially to recognize that the way you've been thinking that the system works is not the way it functions at all. Now, just because something doesn't work the way that you thought it did doesn't mean you can't be inspired by it. So I kind of alluded to this earlier. Biomimicry is in some ways, so biomimicry is great in the sense that nature gives you an example of something that works and has had whatever, billions of years of evolution to tune something that's going to be very effective at whatever that thing is. But the animals that have evolved have a lot of constraints and have a lot of competing, I guess, goals, right? Like the termites need to do a lot of things, not all of which are things that you would want an artificial system to do. And so if you're very attached to copying something in nature, you may be working under limitations that are not actually relevant to your engineered case. So by inspiration, like you use nature as a starting point and then you just go off in whatever direction is productive. So to briefly tell you about this system. So this is a multi-agent system of a team of construction robots inspired by mound building termites, and we tried to make them limited. And these I can actually sort of more safely described as simple. We deliberately made these robots limited in ways that we think of the termites being limited. So in particular, they don't have access to any kind of global information. All they can sense is sort of what's right around them using sensors in their own bodies. And they're not talking to each other the way you would normally have a team of robots talk to each other. There's no broadcast messages. Everything they're doing is through stigmergy. They're looking at the local configuration of material around them. They're using that to help them decide what to do. And as they build, they're changing local configurations. And so that feedback loop is what leads to the structure growing, right, emerging from the set of rules they're following. So as I said at the beginning, like in general, like we don't have a sort of a well-established way of doing this kind of thing. And so when we set out to build this, there were two, I think, sort of big ideas that I would highlight as being behind getting this to work. And I don't want to claim that these are our ideas, right? Like these are well-established big ideas, but I'm just going to sort of point to them as being especially relevant for this system. So the first one, again, is this harnessing the environment. And so the robots are using the blocks. They're using them in two different ways. There's the algorithmic way that I was just describing, where they look at a local configuration and they use that to help them decide what to do. But they're also using them physically. And they're using them physically actually sort of in the algorithmic sense. My second bullet point here under algorithmically is that when you have these, again, limited robots that don't have any good odometry of their own and there's no GPS, the structure that they're building can actually become the coordinate system that they're using for reference and they build with respect to. And so that's part of the reason for these crosses on top of the blocks. As they move around, they see these patterns of black and white changing underneath them, and they use that to keep track of where they are. And then physically, there's this broad idea, again, hopefully this has been something that's come up in other lectures, but of morphological computation or mechanical intelligence. There's a lot of different names for this. Basically, you could make the physics of the world handle something for you, then your job is easier. So from the robot standpoint, the robots are imprecise. If they're building, they need to arrange things precisely. And so rather than make the robots much more capable, make them like really able to manipulate these materials carefully and put them down in precise alignment, instead we're giving that job to the materials. Right? And so there are physical features on the blocks that do things like make sure that they're precisely aligned if the robots get them to about the right place. And so that allows these unreliable robots to reliably build the larger scale things. So that's one big thing. The other big thing is kind of ironically for trying to design a complex system, but we're going to limit the complexity. So this is a thing we do, again, like all the time in engineered systems. If you look inside a termite mound, you see a big mess, right? Like there's a lot of termites all running around. It's a very sort of uncontrolled looking system, and there would be a lot of, I guess, difficulty in coordinating things under those circumstances. We don't ever try to coordinate multi-agent systems without putting rules in. So the most immediate example is, if we have a gabillion independent drivers, all driving on the roads, we don't force them to avoid each other in a giant game of bumper cars. We impose rules, right? We put directions on highways, and that lets people do things like drive very fast without having to pay very close attention to the road and make sure that they're not going to run into somebody coming the other way. So a similar idea here. So we wound up essentially with two different sets of rules. There's a set of what amounts to traffic laws that, like, highways being in one direction or the other, keeps them sort of flowing through the workspace without conflicts. And then there's a set of safety checks that ensures that they're not putting down blocks in situations that will lead them to sort of build themselves into a corner where they can't keep making progress. And those two sets of rules together interact in such a way that you can guarantee that they will always be able to keep making progress toward a structure whose picture you give them to start with. They won't get stuck along the way. And so this lets you give the system, again, a description, a high-level description of what you want them to build, essentially compiles it into a set of rules that the individuals follow that will provably lead to that outcome. And I want to emphasize this being collective intelligence. Right? This is so the robots are going beyond what the termites do, in the sense that the termites are not trying to build a particular system, right? They're not trying to build a particular mound. They're building something that works for the environment that it's in. The robots are trying to build a particular thing, because usually when, as an engineered system, like if we want something built, typically we're going to have a blueprint to start with, and we give that to the contractor, and the contractor will go build that thing, and we don't want them to build something that's sort of like the blueprint we give them, but not really. In both cases, the agents don't know sort of the high level state of what they're trying to build. In the case of these robots, the information about what they're trying to build is in the rules. Like, that information content is contained in the rules somewhere. It must be, or else you wouldn't have a guarantee of getting that thing. But it's not necessarily interpretable. It's not something that, if you're a robot or if you're a human just looking at the robot rules, that you're going to be able to sort of extrapolate from that and say, oh, I see, they're going to build this thing. So that information is, it's in the rules, it's in the building process as it occurs, but it's really something that's happening at the system level and not something at the level of the individual robots. So now, as I said, usually, a second ago, I said, usually when we start a construction project, we have a blueprint and then we give that to the contractor. That's not quite true. We start with an idea and we go to an architect and we ask them for a blueprint, and they give us a blueprint, and we give that blueprint to the contractor. So a further extension of this kind of thing would be to skip the architect as well, right? To do something that is actually more like what the termites are doing and build something that is suited to the environment that it's in. So this, sort of cartoony example is, let's suppose you want to build a bridge across a river, but you don't want to have to go and survey very carefully the terrain on both sides of the river. You don't want to have to figure out exactly what's going to be built to fit into the space. You just want to sort of send a bunch of robots with a bunch of building material and tell them, I want a bridge across the river, and have them just go to it. And so they're going to, again, to be responding to the environment, right? As they build, they'll add material where they need to add anchoring or to add counterweights, and eventually, as they continue to extend this cantilever, it can make its way across the river. And so, the goal here is to be able to get something that is functionally specified rather than like blueprint level specified. And so the big distinct thing that we looked at in some earlier work on this problem was another form of again, like looking at environmental cues, but specifically about looking at physical forces within the structure. So as robots are traveling over, we decided not to do something that was quite so amorphous as this. So let's go ahead and build a sort of, truss-looking thing. Like there are excellent, mechanical reasons that we like to build things with trusses of triangular struts. So let's stick with that framework, but not give the robots any sort of, again, like no global information, no detailed blueprint, just try to have them build as far as they can out across a gap. And the thing they're paying attention to is forces on the structure as they travel, right? And so the longer the unsupported cantilever gets, the more stress is going to be working to break it. So the structure itself could break like this, or the whole thing could actually just tip and fall into the river if it's not anchored. And so those are two different failure modes that we'd like to avoid. And we wound up just finding this heuristic, basically, that if you look at the forces, so these red and blue marks here, um, where this strut plugs into this node. So there's force sensors here, just like pressure sensors on opposite sides. And the heuristic was if the difference in those two forces gets to be too large, then that is an indication that you shouldn't go out. The robot that comes here and measures that should not go out onto that strut, should go somewhere else. And that's not a lot of information, but that little information is enough to make it possible to build much, much longer cantilevers, on average, before they fail. So this point about force awareness, I think, is something that I think is going to be important in more physical systems. I want to very quickly talk about some sort of just the beginnings of some work here on a different, again, biologically inspired system. So the system that we're starting with, the biological system here, is California blackworms. So these are independent worms that, under the right conditions, will entangle together into blobs, and the blobs can be arbitrarily large. And when the worms are in this entangled state, they can actually like do interesting things. They move around. They can. So here's something that looks particularly, I think, compelling. There's a little food pellet on the end of this. Let me restart that. There's this food pellet, and this blob of worms looks like an organism to our eye. Like comes in, grabs the food, like takes it away. So this is like a really cool new system that has not been studied a lot. So we set out to build. Oh, sorry. This video is showing the blob. This one is making its way slowly across the base of a dish towards some food that got dumped in over here. So we set out to build, a physical system. The system of pneumatic soft robots with worm-like high aspect ratio, which can entangle into blobs. The blobs can then do things like this collective locomotion. And where this is going, I think, is the physical forces aspect of it. So the individual worms, again, are going to be very limited in what they can perceive. But one thing that they ought to be able to perceive, and we don't know whether the worms do this, but they could be doing it. But again, from the standpoint of bioinspiration versus biomimicry, it doesn't matter if the worms are doing this. Some information that is available to the individuals could be how they're being pulled on by the other agents in the blob, and that tugging, those physical forces, I think, are going to turn out to be a useful cue that the robots can use to help the blob, to help the collective do, again, like interesting things that may be what the worms do, that may go beyond what the worms do. This is work that's just getting started, but I think this is an exciting project that I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops. One more example I want to give of a natural system, and in particular a collective construction system, is beavers. So this is going to be another story where the moral is sort of like we set out to study the system where we thought we knew how it worked, and it turned out that when we went and looked more carefully at nature, it turned out that nature was doing something different than the conventional wisdom. So beavers are they're a collective construction system. They don't have like millions of individuals in a colony the way that termites do, but they have maybe a couple dozen in a family, in a colony. And of course they build, right? They're most famous for building dams. But actually they build a lot of other kinds of structures as well. So I think it may not be useful for me to go through all of these, but just to focus on two of these in particular that I want to emphasize. In addition to the dams, they build trails and they build canals. So the trails are where they clear vegetation from an area on land, and the canals are where they're excavating a passage that floods with water that they can swim through. And both of these are things that happen at very large scales, and in particular at much larger scales than the dams. So the dam is the sort of the showy thing that, like, if you're thinking about beavers and if you're going to look, and if you're going to go out and look at beavers and say, like, what's the interesting thing they're doing, it's the thing that's going to catch your eye. And it's the thing that I think makes us, makes them a nature's engineer, right? It's the thing that makes them sort of compelling to us, is they build these big things, and the dams that they build then have these transformative effects on the landscape around them. But they, if you sort of pull the view back, there is something else they're doing that's much larger scale, and then I think takes a lot more of their effort. Now I say, if you pull farther back, it's actually very difficult to study beaver construction. I mean, it's difficult to study the process even just of dam construction. Like, beavers are they're nocturnal. They're very shy. Like, if you get near them, they may abandon an area if they start to feel crowded by somebody trying to observe them. They spend most of their time underwater, and starting a new dam is a rare event, so it can be very hard to basically to catch the initiation of a new dam. And a lot of their habitat tends to be heavily wooded, right? Like, they'll be in the woods, and it's hard to get sort of a broad view of what they're doing when there's all these trees in the way. So if you're Jordan Kennedy, what you can do is, so Jordan took a bunch of drones and various other equipment, and she traveled to a number of sites across Montana, and monitored many kilometers of streams weekly over the course of a whole building season. And she did this in an area where there's relatively little sort of overhead cover, so that drone surveys can actually show you details of what the beavers are doing. And this is in an area where this is in Montana. There's a lot of mountains and snowfall in the winter, and then in the spring, the snow melts and there's sort of a spring flood, and that meltwater will wash out a lot of the dams that the beavers had built in previous seasons, and so they need to do a lot of building from scratch. And so those two things together mean that it's possible to see a lot of beavers build a lot of dams, and to see it sort of in high detail over a building season, high detail both in space and in time. So so she ended up with these very high resolution, again, spatially and temporally, surveys of these regions populated by beavers. And then you can go through and hand extract features, looking at, in this case, the river boundary is in blue, trails are in purple, canals are in orange. And you wind up with this very rich data set that you can then use to start asking questions like, what and when influences, let me say that differently. What are the environmental cues that influence when beavers build and where beavers build? So the traditional answer to both of those questions is based on the sound of running water. The idea is that when and where a beaver hears water flowing, that is where and when they're going to build. And a little reflection kind of immediately says that can't be the whole story. If that were the only thing that beavers were responding to, then they would spend all of their time trying to dam up waterfalls. And they don't do that. They do something smarter. In fact, you can, again, like, with the benefit of this kind of data set, you can look and see, okay, they're not, they're not just building all the time, they are waiting to start building until the water level subsides to a level that it can support their building. That is, they're not like trying to build dams and trying to build dams and trying to build dams, and it just keeps getting flooded, washed away by the flow. And eventually the flow subsides, and the dam that they keep trying to build now finally can stay without getting washed away. Like obviously, I think that's not a thing that would be energetically favorable for them to do, right? In fact, they are waiting until the water gets low enough, and then they start building. But the really interesting thing here is that you don't see that if you just look at building dams. So this is the flow rate for a bunch of different colonies uh, at the point where we first observed either dam construction with a D or trail construction with a T. And so dam construction, the initiation of dams happens over a wide range of different uh, flow rates. And I could show you other tables here if we look at like the actual calendar date, if we look at the greenness of the vegetation, like other cues that you might think the beavers might be paying attention to. The uh, the initiation of dams is again like scattered all over the place in a table for any of those different measures. But if you look at flow rate and you look at trails, trail initiation consistently happens within a relatively narrow range of flows. And so trail construction precedes dam building, and we think it enables dam building, right? They're building these, again, like these foraging trails are the way they're clearing over land they will follow these trails to get trees and woody vegetation to bring back and build the dams with. And so again, the point here I think is that they're not so they're waiting until conditions will support dam building before they start preparing for dam building. And again, that's only a thing that you see if you look kind of at the bigger picture beyond just the dams. Remark about the canals. So canals are something that beavers build over many generations. Uh, like this is a thing that like they'll excavate a bit sort of over the course of one season. Then if they've been using it, they'll excavate it further the next season. If there's a canal that they have not been using, then it will silt up and fill in. And in a lot of ways, this looks like the ant foraging network, right? The same kind of trails. Trail is the wrong word I want to use because I'm using that in a different formal context here. But these sort of spatial records of uh, paths that are being expanded if they're used and that are vanishing if they're not used. It looks a lot like foraging with pheromone trails, but at a much larger spatial and temporal scale, and also with mammals. This is the only case that I'm aware of, other than humans, where where mammals do this kind of large scale kind of modification of the environment as a way of coordinating their long-term building activity. Um, and what is the sort of the meaning of the canal? So this is back to the question of where do they build? Um, they build trails by the canals. Basically, the canals are telling them where to build. So again, like go back and look at nature, and it turns out the story is richer than you thought. But also, look at the bigger picture, broaden the view. So I want to say a few words, I guess, about cooperative manipulation. So, a bunch of well, perhaps ants, but perhaps robots, whatever, agents working together to move or to manipulate something that's too large for individuals. And I feel like a lot of work on this topic falls at one end or the other of the spectrum. So at one end, you've got things like studies of natural systems where the description is very phenomenological. Like you can say things about kind of how you predict the transportation is going to occur, but you can't necessarily say much about, uh, if you wanted to engineer a system based on this, you can't say how to control the agents to get any particular kind of outcome. You can't have, I guess, careful performance guarantees. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got robot systems, right? Where you can bring kind of all of the power of formalism of robotics to it. Uh, and uh, and you get a lot of power in terms of being able to guarantee particular kinds of motions. Um, the cost of that is that you need a lot of information. Like the individual robots need to know a lot about the the geometry or the mass distribution of the thing they're trying to move. They may need to know how many other robots there are in those other robots' locations. Um, and that's information. And oh, and also they typically need to be in sort of close like broadcast style communication with each other all of the time. So again, that's a lot of kind of infrastructure to build up. Um, and I think there's really room for something in the space in between, right? So uh, when we want to move something, right? Let's suppose that you're rearranging your apartment and you ask some people to help you, pick up and move a big table, right? So that's what I'm going to call like an informal scenario. Uh, you don't want to have to spend a lot of time if it's robots that you're asking for you to help. You don't want to have to spend a lot of time like gathering information about the thing that you want to build and figuring out exactly where you want to put them and assigning them particular paths, right? You just want to sort of pick up and go. And again, the bio-inspiration here is us. Like we know that we do this, and therefore it should be possible somehow. Uh, so that was our starting point for trying to design a controller for these informal scenarios to do that kind of thing. So again, like what do we do? Well, so imagine yourself helping somebody else move a table. Uh, you don't need them to give you instructions, detailed instructions. You can feel the way that the table is moving and use that to help you infer what the intended movement is. And so again, you're using the environment to coordinate, and here the environment is the thing that you're trying to move together. If I guess the duration of a force that you feel uh, affects whether you interpret it as a signal or a perturbation, right? Like if the thing is being pulled in one direction for a long time, like you may reasonably interpret that as, okay, this is a signal. The leader wants me to move it in this direction, versus if something just bumps uh, and that disturbance goes away quickly, like that's something that you can interpret as a perturbation that should be rejected. And so the leader can hold a force for more than a few seconds for the robots following to interpret that as, okay, let's start moving it in this new way. And if if something bumps into the table, again, you can picture yourself like you stiffen up, right? You make sure that the thing is stable as your first priority, and then when stuff has stopped moving and it seems like it's safe to relax, you gradually relax. So we have the robots doing all those things. Oh, sorry, that's the next topic. We have the robots doing all those things, and again, sort of the idea here is that uh, bioinspiration in general is the topic here. Usually, when we talk about bioinspiration, we're looking at animals, at non-human animals. Um, I'm bringing this up as an example where human animals are actually also a very good source of inspiration in some cases. A couple more things I'm going to try to talk about quickly. So this is a different project. This is not my work that I'm showing here now, but uh, 10, 11 years ago, there was this demonstration of a um, insect scale uh, autonomous flying robot. Um, so making this work depended on a lot of very careful engineering, right? And so to the point about bioinspiration versus biomimicry, I guess, if you look at, let's skip ahead actually. So if you look at a bee, right, you can sort of see that the trailing edge of the wing is the wings are twisting, right? The trailing edge of the wing is following the leading edge, right? And there's a persistent myth that bumblebees can't fly, which is a weird thing for people to believe because obviously they do. But the idea is that the aerodynamics of an airplane don't work at bumblebee scale. And yeah, obviously a bumblebee doesn't fly like an airplane. Um, but it's taking advantage of airflow phenomena on this scale and moving, like the way that it moves its wings takes advantage of, again, the physics of the world. And that's something that really you can mimic. So high-speed video of the robot, it's doing the same kind of thing where the wings are allowed to passively twist, and that helps provide that lift that lets this insect scale robot fly. So on the one hand, it can be really useful to look at how nature does something and use that as a design principle and copy it. On the other hand, again, bioinspiration versus biomimicry, you only need to carry that so far. Like if there's something that nature does that the robots don't, sorry, if there's something that nature does that doesn't make sense to build into the robots, you don't need to build that into the robots. I think the obvious example here is is bees famously communicate to each other with this waggle dance, and it would be unnecessarily difficult to build that into robots, where you could just have normal communication between devices. Right? I'm bringing in the waggle dance here as one more example where if you actually go and look at nature, it's not necessarily, it turns out it's not necessarily what you thought it was. So, the waggle dance, like this was a Nobel Prize, right? Like discovering that bees have this dance language that encodes the location of flowers. That is incontrovertibly true. But the surprising thing is the bees watching may actually not pay any attention to what the dancer is telling them. So there are, various studies that have shown that like most of the recruited bees are not going where the dancer is telling them to go. And in fact, if you mess with the setup, if you rearrange things, reposition things in such a way that the dancer is disoriented and sends recruits to the wrong place, it doesn't actually affect the foraging success of the colony. So, I mean, I think there's a question here about like why is there information in the dance if it's not something that the recruits are paying attention to? And again, this is the sort of thing where like kind of in retrospect it makes sense. If you simulate different kinds of environments, it may be better not to pay attention to what the dancer is telling you. Like it depends on the nature of the environment, right? Like if there are flowers everywhere, if there's not a lot of nectar per flower, if flowers take a long time to get replenished, then you actually don't want everybody going to the same place, right? Because you're going to be putting sort of too much of your effort into like a single resource that's too limited, and it's better in some cases, not all cases, to have uh, that foraging more spread out. And obviously, again, like, so I've got this unexplained graph here, right? But relative efficiency is, so 100% is if you go where the dancer is telling you versus, sorry, the efficiency of like the amount of stuff you bring back per effort compared to what that would be if you go where the dancer is telling you. And in some cases, you do better if you ignore the dancer. And in some cases, you do worse if you ignore the dancer, right? Obviously, it's going to depend on the details of the environment. I say obviously in retrospect, right? And in these studies that found that it doesn't really matter where the recruits go, and it doesn't affect the foraging success, and the recruits are not paying attention. I think those may actually have been in environments where it makes sense for the recruits to ignore it. If you do the same experiment in an environment where it is really important to have that dance information, then maybe maybe they will actually follow the dance information, and you'd get a different result from these experiments. Last story I want to tell is my favorite cautionary tale of bioinspiration and sort of uh, again on this theme of like the natural system does not actually do something that matches the story. So there's this example that's become very famous of the digger wasp, or various species of digger wasps. Uh, and this is told as a story to illustrate that insects like don't have cognition, they don't have intelligence, they're just acting like little robots. And they're evolved to do something that appears to be intelligent based on the environment, but it's actually very stupid. So the story is you've got a wasp, it digs a hole, hence it's called a digger wasp. Having dug the hole, the wasp goes out and gets some food. So wasp comes back here with a cricket. Hopefully this is not too laggy over this connection. The wasp drops the cricket outside the nest, goes into the hole because something might have gone in while it was gone. And then it comes back out once it's determined that it's safe to go back into the nest, that there's nothing waiting for it. Comes back out, grabs the cricket, and drags it inside. So that's the natural behavior. And the story is that so here comes the wasp dragging the cricket to the hole. So it drops it, let's say 3 centimeters away. I don't know. 2 centimeters away. If you yourself take the cricket and move it while the wasp is inside the hole, the wasp will come out, get the cricket again, and you would expect if it were being intelligent, it would now just take the cricket into the hole because it's already checked there's nothing inside. But in fact, it'll drop the cricket 1 centimeter outside, go into the hole, come back out, you move it again. You take the wasp grabs the cricket, brings it back, drops it 1 centimeter outside, goes into the hole. And so it looks like this is like a behavioral program that you found a way to interrupt in a way that makes it not make that sort of reveals its limitations, right? Like this is supposed to prove that the wasp doesn't know what it's doing. It's it's following this routine of always drop the cricket and go inside, even if it doesn't make sense for it to do that. There are some problems with the story. So first of all, so again, like the idea is that like, look, you've managed to reveal that the insect is actually not smart. It's a robot. You've found a way to catch it in a behavioral loop that would be maladaptive. This doesn't actually happen in nature, so it doesn't normally happen. But you can sort of pull apart the layers and show, okay, this is not actually an intelligent animal. There's again this theme of the environment again is the thing that is storing the information, right? So the wasp is not remembering, I have already checked inside the hole. It's using kind of the presence of the cricket just outside the hole when it comes out of the hole as the information that it's already checked. And so if you move the cricket, you're erasing that information from the environment. But another problem with this story again is that like this is not actually really the way the wasps go. And it would be more accurate to say it's not accurate. So it's not exactly that it's not true, but like the way the story is told does not appropriately describe the system, right? So there's a paper on this that I love from 2013 that like really kind of digs into this and really tears it apart. And I'm going to just summarize this very quickly. So a couple of problems with it. So first of all, it is not actually the case that when people tell the story, they're like, and you can just do this forever. You can just keep moving the cricket absolutely forever, and the wasp will keep doing it forever, until it starves to death, right? That's not actually true. Even the original report of this, all the way back to Fabre in 1879, who first observed this happening, like in that same description, he said like, okay, and then I did it with some other wasps and it didn't work. Right, like the next one I tried 2 or 3 times, and the wasp didn't drop it outside the burrow; it just took it in. And then some of them like maybe it would take a few more tries before they gave up and just took the thing inside. But it's not actually true that they will just keep doing this forever. Another thing is that this sort of excludes a lot of other stuff that wasps do that is clearly more adaptive to the environment, that is sort of also easy to tell stories about their intelligence. It just ignores all of that um, in order to focus on this one little thing that they do where it makes a good story, right? But where it looks like they're doing something dumb. It may not even be that it's dumb, right? Like part of what the wasp is doing when it comes in and drops the cricket uh, may be positioning it in a way that it goes into the burrow, turns around, like it needs to back into the burrow, dragging the cricket. It can't like push it in. And so, another, I think, valid way potentially to interpret this uh, this phenomenon, this observation, is that the wasp is putting the cricket into a position where it is able to pull it into the hole. And if you move it, it has to reposition it in a way that it's able to move it into the hole, and it has to go into the hole to turn around. So uh, again, it's like the eyes with which you look at this change the way you understand it. And I think the kind of the I don't know the cap on the story is again, as this author points out, um, it's not the uh, it's not the insect that is doing this stupid thing that's repeating it over and over, even though there's no good actual reason to do it. It's actually the humans telling the story over and over, despite the fact that that's not really the way that the wasp behaves. And the end of this paper, I think, is very trenchant and says that there's no reason for humans to remain stuck in an endless behavioral loop when wasps don't. So that is kind of the final cautionary tale that I want to share for my inspiration. And I want to close by thanking people involved with the work that I showed you. Too many, I think, for me to name independently. And also I want to acknowledge my funding sources. And I think we've got a few minutes now to for discussion and questions.